I'd been on the road for nearly 10 hours straight, my body aching from the long haul. The highway stretched endlessly before me, an empty void of asphalt cutting through the night. I knew I needed to stop soon. My fuel gauge was getting dangerously low, and my eyelids were growing heavier with each passing mile. That's when I saw it, a dimly lit gas station sign flickering in the distance. I frowned. I had taken this route plenty of times before, but I didn't remember a gas station being out here. Still, I wasn't about to question good luck. I slowed down, pulling into the station's cracked and uneven lot. The place looked old, abandoned almost, yet the pumps were still standing, and a single fluorescent light buzzed above the small convenience store. The neon open sign flickered weakly in the window. As I stepped out of the truck, a heavy silence pressed in around me. There were no other vehicles, no movement, not even the usual hum of insects you'd expect on a warm night. The air smelled stale, like dust and oil left to rot. I took a cautious step toward the convenience store, glancing around. The windows were grimy, and the inside was dimly lit. I could barely make out the shelves stocked with old snacks and faded soda cans. Pushed open the door, and a small bell above jingled, too loud in the oppressive quiet. The air inside was even worse than outside, thick with the scent of mildew. The place looked frozen in time, like it hadn't been updated in decades. The coolers buzzed faintly, but most were empty, except for a few discolored bottles of water and sodas. Behind the counter, a cash register sat covered in a thin layer of dust. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding hollow in the stillness. No answer. I rang the service bell on the counter, the sharp ding cutting through the air. A second passed, then another. Just as I was about to turn around and leave, I heard something, a faint shuffling sound coming from the back room. My stomach tightened. "Anyone here?" I asked, louder this time. No response. The noise stopped, and for a moment everything was still again. I took a step back toward the door, suddenly feeling the urge to leave. That's when I saw it. Something moved in the reflection of the cooler's glass door. A shadow, barely visible, shifting in the dim light. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. There was nothing there, just rows of dusty shelves and the door leading to the storage room slightly ajar. My pulse quickened. Something about this place was wrong. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, but my truck still needed fuel. Swallowing my unease, I turned back to the counter, determined to leave as soon as I filled up. I placed a few crumpled bills on the counter as payment and stepped outside. The night air felt colder now, the silence even more suffocating. As I walked toward the pump, I had the distinct feeling of being watched. Slowly, I turned my head, glancing at the store's window. My blood ran cold. There, just beyond the glass, a figure stood in the shadows, barely visible, watching me. My breath caught in my throat as I locked eyes with the figure behind the glass. It didn't move. It just stood there, a dark silhouette blending with the shadows of the store. The shape was human, but something about it was wrong. The proportions seemed off, like it was too tall or its limbs were slightly elongated. I blinked, and in that split second it was gone. My heart pounded as I forced myself to move toward the gas pump, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched. My hands trembled as I inserted the nozzle and began fueling up. The pump let out a slow mechanical clunk, the numbers rolling painfully slow on the display. Every second felt like an eternity. I kept my eyes locked on my truck's side mirror, half expecting to see that figure standing behind me. Then, just as I started to calm myself, the lights above the gas station flickered violently before shutting off completely. The entire place was swallowed by darkness except for the dim glow of my truck's taillights. My stomach dropped. The silence around me deepened, almost as if the entire world had gone still. A noise broke through the quiet. Tap, tap, tap. The unmistakable sound of fingers drumming against glass. I turned my head toward the store window, but it was pitch black inside now. The only thing I could see was my reflection in the glass. and something standing directly behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. My chest rose and fell in sharp, ragged breaths. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't alone. The fuel pump clicked, signaling that my tank was full, but I barely registered it. I yanked the nozzle out and jumped into my truck, locking the doors with shaky hands. My headlights flared to life as I turned the key, illuminating the gas station one last time. And that's when I saw it. Standing just beyond the edge of the light, at the far side of the lot, was the figure. Closer now, still unmoving, still watching. My entire body screamed at me to leave. Without hesitation, I slammed my foot on the gas, my tires screeching against the pavement as I sped away. I didn't dare look in the mirrors. I didn't want to see if it was following me. I drove for miles, my grip locked on the wheel, my mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. Eventually, I spotted a diner and pulled in, needing to catch my breath. The place was warm, filled with the comforting murmur of late-night travelers. I sat at the counter, still shaking, when the waitress came over. "You okay, honey?" she asked, noticing my pale face. I hesitated before speaking. I just stopped. "At that gas station a few miles back? You know the one?" Her expression changed instantly. The friendly warmth drained from her face, replaced by something cold. "There's no gas station on that road," she said. "Not anymore. It burned. Down over 10 years ago after a few truckers went missing. No one ever found them." Being a trucker, you get used to the loneliness of the road, the long, empty stretches of highway, the endless hours with nothing but the hum of the engine for company. But there are moments, rare, unsettling moments, when the road doesn't feel so empty, when you get the sense that something is riding with you, even when you're alone. I learned that the hard way. It started with small things, a soft creaking sound from the trailer like metal shifting. At first, I dismissed it. An empty trailer always makes noise, the wind, the road, the vibrations of the truck itself. But as the night stretched on, the sounds became more distinct, more deliberate. What I heard next made my skin crawl. Footsteps, slow, measured footsteps coming from inside the trailer. I glanced in my side mirror, expecting to see something, but the highway behind me was empty. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. Maybe something had come loose in the back, rolling around. That had to be it, but deep down I knew that didn't explain the sound. It wasn't random, it was the sound of someone walking. My gut told me to keep driving, to ignore it, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. I pulled off onto a secluded rest area, the kind with just a couple of dim streetlights. And nothing else. Stepping out of the cab, the cold air hit me like a warning. I hesitated before unlocking the trailer doors, my flashlight trembling in my grip. When I swung the doors open, the beam of my light cut through the darkness. The trailer was empty. No loose cargo, no animals, nothing that could have made the noise. I let out a shaky breath, almost laughing at myself for being so paranoid. But then I saw them, handprints, smudged into the dust on the metal floor, as if someone had been crawling inside. A chill ran through me as I stepped back, my mind racing. Had someone been in there? Was someone still in there? I swept the light across the trailer again, my pulse hammering in my ears, but there was no one, just silence and those damn handprints. Not wanting to spend another second there, I slammed the doors shut and locked them, climbing back into the cab as fast as I could. I got back on the highway, telling myself I was just imagining things. Maybe the prints had been there from before, from workers loading and unloading cargo. Yeah, that had to be it, but that uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. My trailer felt wrong, like it was carrying something unseen. I turned the radio on to drown out my thoughts, but the static was deafening. That's when the knocking started, rhythmic, slow, from inside the trailer. My blood ran cold. I stared straight ahead, refusing to look in the mirrors. The knocks grew louder, more insistent. And then, clear as day, I heard a voice, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Let us out." My entire body tensed. I wanted to convince myself I had imagined it, that the long hours on the road were messing with my head. But the knocking continued. 3 slow, deliberate thuds, followed by another whisper. "Let us out." My hands gripped the wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I refused to look in the mirrors. I refused to acknowledge whatever was back there. But then the truck lurched, not like I had hit a pothole. This was different. It felt as if something had shifted the weight in the trailer, like someone was moving inside. My heart pounded against my ribs. I was done pretending, whatever was. In there wasn't my imagination. I needed to stop. I spotted a truck stop up ahead, the glowing red neon sign cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Pulling into the lot, I parked under the brightest light I could find. The place was nearly empty except for another truck parked a few spaces away. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, trying to steady my breath. Steeling myself, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The cold night air wrapped around me, and for a second, everything was eerily quiet. Too quiet. I made my way to the back of the trailer, swallowing the lump in my throat. The lock was still in place, untouched. But as I reached for it, something sent a shiver down my spine. The dust on the back doors was disturbed, as if fingers had dragged across it. Long, uneven streaks, like someone had been clawing to get out. My stomach twisted, but I had to know. With trembling hands, I unlocked the doors and swung them open. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness. The trailer was empty, completely empty. But the handprints I had seen earlier, they were gone. The dust-covered floor was undisturbed, like no one had ever been inside. The air inside the trailer felt heavy, almost suffocating. My skin prickled as if I was being watched. "You okay?" There, a voice startled me. I turned to see an older trucker standing a few feet away, eyeing me with concern. I hesitated before nodding. He must have noticed how shaken I looked because he walked closer, glancing at my trailer. "You hear something back there?" he asked, his tone serious. I told him everything, the footsteps, the knocking, the whispers. I expected him to laugh, but he didn't. Instead, he let out a slow breath and shook his head. "You ever hear about the accident on Highway 46? he asked. I shook my head. His expression darkened. "Years ago, a group of migrants was smuggled in a trailer just like yours," he said. "The driver abandoned them in the heat. By the time anyone found them, it was too late." A chill ran down my spine. "They say some trailers, they carry more than just cargo. Some of them, they carry memories." His eyes flicked to my truck. "Maybe even spirits." I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even stay at the truck stop. I got in my cab, locked the doors, and drove until the sun came up. The knocking never returned, the whispers never came back, but I never forgot that night. And to this day, I refuse to haul an empty trailer, because some trailers, no matter how empty they seem, are never truly empty. The mountains can be both beautiful and unforgiving, especially at night. I had been on the road for nearly 12 hours, winding through narrow mountain passes with sheer cliffs on one side and towering rock walls on the other. The road was desolate, no other cars in sight, just the distant hum of my engine and the rhythmic thud of tires against the pavement. I should have stopped hours ago, but I was on a tight schedule and pushed through the fatigue. That was my first mistake. My eyelids were heavy, my focus slipping. I reached for my coffee, now cold and bitter, and took a sip. That's when I saw movement up ahead, something darting across the road. My foot hovered over the brake, but whatever it was disappeared too fast for me to react. My hands tightened on the wheel, probably just a stray animal, or at least that's what I told myself. A few miles later, I saw it again. This time, it wasn't running. A large black dog stood at the side of the road, its eyes reflecting the glow of my headlights. It was motionless, just staring. Something about it unsettled me. Most strays would run, or at least flinch when faced with a massive truck barreling toward them, but this one just watched. I honked my horn, but it didn't move. As I passed, I glanced in the mirror. The dog was gone. My My stomach tightened. The road was straight, no trees or hills to hide behind. There was nowhere for it to go. I shook off the unease, convincing myself I was just exhausted. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I continued driving, the air in the cab feeling heavier, like a storm was coming. My headlights barely cut through the thickening fog, and the curves in the road became sharper, more dangerous. That's when I felt it, a sudden jolt. The truck lurched forward as if something had hit me from behind. I gripped the wheel, my pulse racing. Then I heard it, a low growl. It was faint, but unmistakable, coming from somewhere behind the cab. My breath hitched. Was there an animal under the truck? No, that wasn't possible. I would have seen it. I checked my mirrors, but all I saw was the empty highway stretching behind me. The growling stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I swallowed hard and focused on the road, ignoring the creeping sensation that I wasn't alone. Then my brakes failed. My foot slammed on the brake pedal, but it was useless. Nothing happened. The truck kept moving, gaining speed as the road sloped downward. My hands were slick with sweat as I downshifted, trying to regain control. The engine roared, the gears grinding, but I was still going too fast. That's when I saw the next curve up ahead, a deadly drop on the other side. My heart pounded as I fought the wheel, desperate to keep the truck from skidding off the edge. Just when I thought I was done for, the black dog appeared again, right in the middle of the road. Its eyes glowed eerily in the headlights, and for a split second, I felt like it was looking straight into me. Then, without warning, it leaped directly in front of my truck. Instinct took over. I yanked the wheel hard to the right, my tires screeching as I forced the truck into a controlled skid. The trailer fishtailed, but at the last moment I managed to regain balance, stopping just inches from the edge of the cliff. My entire body was shaking. I sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel like a lifeline, trying to catch my breath. The dog was gone. No sign of it in the road. No body. Nothing. It was as if it had never been there in the first place. But I knew what I saw. It had saved me. If I hadn't swerved, I would have gone straight off the edge. My brakes had failed at the worst possible moment, or maybe the perfect one. Eventually, I managed to crawl my way to the nearest truck stop. I pulled in, still shaking, and parked under the bright lights. Inside, I found an older trucker sitting at the counter. I must have looked like hell because he gave me a knowing glance and said, "You saw the dog, didn't you?" My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely steady. The old man nodded. "That black dog, you're not the first to see it." He took a sip of his coffee, then continued. "A lot of drivers on that road never make it past that curve. Brakes fail, they go off the edge, and no one finds them for days. But some of us get warned." I swallowed hard. "You're saying that thing was protecting me?" The old man shrugged. "Call it what you want. A guardian, a curse, an omen. All I know is that the ones who see it live to tell the tale." I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I had my brakes checked by a mechanic at the truck stop. He whistled when he saw them. "You're lucky you made it here," he said. "Your brake lines were completely severed." To this day, I don't know what really happened that night. Maybe I was just lucky. Maybe the dog was something else, something watching over the road, saving those who weren't meant to die. All I know is that every time I drive through those mountains, I keep an eye out for it. And if I ever see those glowing eyes again, I won't be afraid. I'll know it's watching. Long-haul trucking teaches you one thing fast. The road is unpredictable. You see weird things out here, things you can't always explain. I thought I had seen it all. That was before the night I drove down that cursed stretch of highway and saw the lights. It was past midnight, and I was hauling a full load through a remote desert highway. No cars, no towns, just miles of empty road stretching into the darkness. The sky was clear, stars scattered across it like tiny pinpricks of light. I was exhausted, eager to reach the next truck stop, when I noticed something in my mirror, headlights in the distance. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another truck behind me. But something felt off. The lights weren't getting closer, nor were they falling back. They just hovered there, maintaining the exact same distance. I kept driving, expecting the vehicle to pass me at some point, but it never did. Then the flashing started. The truck behind me blinked its high beams once, twice, then a pause. Another flash. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, like it was trying to signal me. My grip on the wheel tightened. I turned on my CB radio, trying to reach the other driver. "Hey, buddy, you trying to tell me something?" Static, no response. The flashes continued. 2 quick blinks. A pause, 3 more blinks, a pattern. It was almost like Morse code. I didn't know what it meant, but the repetition made my skin crawl. That's when I noticed something even stranger. The lights weren't coming from a truck. My stomach twisted as I realized that whatever was behind me was too high off the ground to be a normal vehicle. It was hovering, floating. My pulse spiked as an icy dread settled in my gut. I tapped my brakes, hoping to get a better look, but the lights disappeared instantly, just blinked out, like they had never been there. I let out a shaky breath, my brain scrambling for an explanation. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe I had imagined it. But just as I was convincing myself it was over, the lights reappeared ahead of me. My heart skipped a beat. The lights were now ahead of me, hovering just above the road. They weren't normal headlights. They were too bright, too perfectly aligned, almost like they were suspended in the air. They didn't move like a car. They didn't sway, didn't bounce with the road. They just floated. I slowed down, unsure of what to do. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to get the hell out of there, but something kept me going forward. As I approached, the lights did something that made my stomach drop. They started flashing again, the same pattern from before. 2 quick blinks, a pause, 3 more blinks. Whatever was out there was still trying to signal me, but why? My breath came out shaky as I gripped the wheel. That's when I remembered something I had heard years ago from another trucker. If you ever see lights on this highway flashing in a pattern, check your cargo. My blood ran cold. I had brushed it off as just another road legend. But now, sitting there with those lights staring me down, I wasn't so sure. My trailer had been locked tight when I left the last stop, but suddenly I had this overwhelming need to check. I pulled onto the shoulder, leaving the engine running, and stepped out. The air was dead silent. No wind, no insects, nothing. Just the distant hum of my truck and the unnatural glow of those lights. I walked to the back of the trailer, my hands trembling as I unlocked the doors. When I swung them open, my flashlight beam cut through the dark. At first, everything looked normal. Then I saw them. Footprints smudged into the dust on the trailer floor, leading from the far end to just behind the doors. My stomach twisted. Someone or something had been inside, but how? The lock was still intact. There was no sign of forced entry. My breath hitched as I stepped back, my entire body screaming at me to leave. Slamming the doors shut, I locked them and rushed back to the cab. As I climbed in, I dared one last glance toward the road. The lights were gone, vanished, as if they had never been there. I didn't waste time trying to understand it. I threw the truck into gear and sped off, leaving that stretch of highway behind. I never figured out what those lights were or what they were trying to warn me about, but one. The thing is certain, I wasn't alone in that trailer that night, and if those lights hadn't appeared, I don't know if I'd still be here to tell this story. There's something about driving at night that plays tricks on your mind. Maybe it's the long hours of solitude, the endless road stretching into darkness, or the way shadows seem to move just at the edge of your vision. I've been a trucker for years, and I thought I'd seen it all. That was before the night I saw him. It was just past 2 a.m., and I was hauling a full load through one of the loneliest stretches of highway I'd ever driven. No streetlights, no towns for miles, just the occasional abandoned gas station or rusted out billboard. The only company I had was the soft hum of the radio and the low rumble of the engine. I was tired, but I'd pushed through worse. Then it happened. Out of pure habit, I glanced up at my rearview mirror and my stomach dropped. There was someone sitting in the back of my cab. My breath caught in my throat. I could only see his outline, tall, thin, his face just out of focus in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. I knew I was alone. I had been alone this entire trip. But there he was, clear as day, sitting there like he had been riding with me the entire time. My first instinct was to slam the brakes, but something stopped me. Instead, I flicked on the overhead light, my heart hammering in my chest. The cab lit up, empty. No one was there. I turned in my seat, scanning every inch of the small space behind me. Nothing. Just my gear, my duffel bag, and the faint smell of stale coffee. My pulse was racing as I took a shaky breath. Maybe I was just exhausted, my mind playing tricks. On me? Yeah, that had to be it. I forced myself to focus on the road, telling myself I'd pull over at the next rest stop to grab some coffee and clear my head. But when I looked back at the mirror, he was there again. This time, he was closer. My chest tightened as I stared at the mirror. The figure was no longer sitting in the back. It had moved closer, leaning forward as if it wanted me to see it clearly. My hands clenched the wheel, my knuckles turning white. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The truck rumbled down the highway, the road stretching endlessly ahead, but my focus was locked on the mirror. The figure was still blurry, like it was caught between reality and something else, but I could make out details now. Its face was gaunt, sunken eyes peering at me through the dim light. It didn't move. It just watched. My instincts screamed at me to stop the truck and get the hell out, but I couldn't. Something deep inside told me that stopping would be the worst thing I could do, so I kept driving, my breathing shallow, my heart pounding. I reached for the radio, desperate for some kind of distraction, static, just like before. Then the whispering started. It was faint at first, barely audible over the hum of the engine, but it grew louder, layered voices overlapping, whispering words I couldn't understand. My skin crawled, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I gritted my teeth, refusing to look in the mirror again, and then the truck lurched, like something had shifted inside the cab. My body jerked forward, and for the first time I broke. I turned my head, expecting to see someone sitting behind me. Nothing, but the whispering hadn't stopped. It was inside the cab now, wrapping around me like a suffocating fog. My hands trembled as I pressed harder on the gas, desperate to outrun whatever the hell was in here with me. My eyes flicked back to the mirror one last time. The figure was gone. The whispering stopped. I didn't pull over until I saw the bright lights of a truck stop up ahead. I parked under the brightest lamp I could find, locked my doors, and sat there, my hands still gripping the wheel. I couldn't explain what had happened, but I knew one thing. I was not alone on that highway, and maybe I never had been.